Chapter 15. He visited the Capitoline and the Villa Borghese, exploring the Forum thoroughly, and took 6 Italian lessons from an old man in his neighborhood who had a tutoring sign in his window, and to whom Tom gave a false name. After the 6th lesson, Tom thought that his Italian was on par with Dickie's. He remembered verbatim several sentences that Dickie had said at one time or another, which he now knew were incorrect. For example, "O paura che non c'è arrivata, Giorgio," one evening in Giorgio's, when they had been waiting for Marge and she had been late. It should have been sia arrivata, in the subjunctive after an expression of fearing. Dickie had never used the subjunctive as often as it should be used in Italian. Tom studiously kept himself from learning the proper use of subjunctives. Tom bought dark red velvet for the drapes in his living room because the drapes that had come with the apartment offended him. When he had asked Signora Buffi, the wife of the house superintendent, if she knew of a seamstress who could make them up, Signora Buffi had offered to make them herself. Her price was 2,000 lire, hardly more than $3. Tom forced her to take 5,000. He bought several minor items to embellish his apartment, though he never asked anyone up, with the exception of one attractive but not very bright young man, an American whom he had met in the Cafe Greco, when the young man had asked him how to get to the Hotel Excelsior from there. The Excelsior was on the way to Tom's house, so Tom asked him to come up for a drink. Tom had only wanted to impress him for an hour and then say goodbye to him forever, which he did, after serving him his best brandy and strolling around his apartment, discoursing on the pleasure of life in Rome. The young man was leaving for Munich the following day. Tom carefully avoided the American residents of Rome, who might expect him to come to the parties and ask them to his in return, though he loved to chat with Americans and Italians in the Cafe Greco and in the students' restaurants in the Via Margutta. He told his name only to an Italian painter named Carlino, whom he met in a Via Margutta tavern, told him also that he had painted, and was studying with a painter called Di Massimo. If the police ever investigated Dickie's activities in Rome, perhaps long after Dickie had disappeared and become Tom Ripley again, this one Italian painter could be relied upon to say he knew Dickie Greenleaf, and had been painting in Rome in January. Carlino had never heard of Di Massimo, but Tom described him so vividly that Carlino would probably never forget him. He felt alone, yet not at all lonely. It was very much like the feeling on Christmas Eve in Paris, a feeling that everyone was watching him, and as if he had an audience made up of the entire world, a feeling that kept him on a medal, because to make a mistake would be catastrophic. Yet he felt absolutely confident he would not make a mistake. It gave him existence, a peculiar, delicious atmosphere of purity, like that, Tom thought, which a fine actor probably feels when he plays an important role on a stage, with the conviction that the role he is playing could not be played better by anyone else. He was himself, and yet not himself. He felt blameless and free, despite the fact that he consciously controlled every move he made. But he no longer felt tired after several hours of it, as he had at first. He had no need to relax when he was alone. Now, from the moment when he got out of bed and went to brush his teeth, he was Dickie, brushing his teeth with his elbow jutted out. Dickie's rotating the eggshell on his spoon for the last bite. Dickie invariably putting back the first tie he pulled off the rack and selected a second. He had even produced a painting in Dickie's manner. By the end of January, Tom thought that Fausto must have come and gone through Rome, though Marge's last letters had not mentioned him. Marge wrote, care of the American Express, about once a week. She asked if he needed any socks or a muffler, because she had plenty of time to knit. Besides working on her book, she always put in a funny anecdote about somebody they knew in the village, just so Dickie wouldn't think that she was eating her heart out for him, though obviously she was. And obviously she wasn't going to leave for the States in February without making another desperate try for him in person. Tom thought hence the investments of the long letters and the knitted socks and mufflers, which Tom knew were coming, even though he hadn't replied to her letters. Her letters repelled him. He disliked even touching them, and after he glanced through them, he tore them up and dropped them into the garbage. He wrote finally, I'm giving up the idea of an apartment in Rome for the time being. Di Massimo is going to Sicily for several months, and I may go with him and go on somewhere from there. My plans are vague, but they have the virtue of freedom, and that suits my present mood. Don't send me any socks, Marge. I really don't need a thing. Wish you much luck with Mangiabello. He had a ticket for Majorca by train to Naples, then the boat from Naples to Palma, over the night of January 31st and February 1st. He had bought 2 new suitcases from Gucci's, the best leather goods store in Rome. One, a large soft suitcase of antelope hide, the other a neat tan canvas with brown leather straps. Both bore Dicky's initials. He had thrown the shabbier of his own 2 suitcases away, and the remaining one he kept in the closet of his apartment, full of his own clothes in case of emergency. But Tom was not expecting any emergencies. The scuttled boat in San Remo had never been found. Tom looked through the papers every day for something about it. While Tom was packing his suitcases one morning, his doorbell rang. He supposed it was a solicitor of some kind or a mistake. He had no name on his doorbell, and he had only told the superintendent that he did not want his name on the doorbell because he didn't like people to drop in on him. It rang for the second time, and Tom still ignored it and went on with his lackadaisical packing. He loved to pack, and he took a long time about it, a whole day or 2 days, laying Dicky's clothes affectionately into suitcases, now and then trying on a good-looking shirt or a jacket in front of the mirror. He was standing in front of the mirror, buttoning a blue and white seahorse patterned sport shirt of Dicky's that he had never worn, when there came a knock again at the door. It crossed his mind that it might be Fausto, that it would be just like Fausto to hunt him down in Rome and try to surprise him. That was silly, he told himself, but his hands were cool with sweat as he went to the door. He felt faint, and the absurdity of his faintness, plus the danger of keeping and keeling over and being found prostrate on the floor, made him wrench the door open with both hands, though he opened it only a few inches. Hello, the American voice said out of the semi-darkness of the hall. Dickie, it's Freddy. Tom took a step back, holding the door open. Won't you come in? He's not here right now. He should be back a little later. Freddy Miles came in, looking around. His ugly, freckled face gawked in every direction. How in hell had he found the place, Tom wondered. Tom slipped his rings off quickly and pocketed them. And what else? He glanced around the room. You're staying with him? Freddy asked with that wallowed stare that made his face look idiotic and rather scared. Oh, no, I'm not just staying here for a few hours, Tom said, casually removing the seahorse shirt. He had another shirt on under it. Dickie's out for lunch. Otello's, I think he said. He should be back around 3 at the latest. One of the boofies must have let Freddy in, Tom thought, and told him which bell to press, and told him Senor Greenleaf was in, too. Freddy had probably said he was an old friend of Dickie's. Now he would have to get Freddy out of the house without running into Senor Buffy downstairs, because she always sang out, Buongiorno, Senor Greenleaf. I met you in Mangiabello, didn't I? Freddy asked. Aren't you Tom? I thought you were coming to Cartina. I couldn't make it, thanks. How was Cartina? Oh, fine. What happened to Dickie? Oh, didn't he write you? He decided to spend the winter in Rome. He told me he'd written you. Not a word, unless he wrote to Florence, but I was in Salzburg, and he had my address. Freddy half sat on Tom's long table, rumbling the green silk runner. He smiled. Marge told me he moved to Rome, but she didn't have any address except the American Express. It was only by a damn luck I found this apartment. I ran into somebody at the Greco last night who just happened to know his address. What's the idea of... Who? Tom asked. An American? No, an Italian fellow, just a young kid. Freddie was looking at Tom's shoes. You got the same kind of shoes Dickie and I have. They were like irons, don't they? I bought my pair in London 8 years ago. They were Dickie's grain leather shoes. These came from America. Tom said, Can I offer you a drink, or would you rather try to catch Dickie at Otello's? Do you know where it is? There's not much use in you waiting because he generally takes till 3 with his lunches. I'm going out soon myself. Freddie had strolled toward the bedroom and stopped, looking at the suitcase on the bed. Is Dickie leaving for somewhere, or did he just get here? Freddie asked, turning. He's leaving. Didn't Marge tell you? He's going to Sicily for a while. When? Tomorrow or late tonight. I'm not quite sure. Say, what's the matter with Dickie lately? Freddie asked, frowning. What's the idea of all this seclusion? He says he's been working pretty hard this winter, Tom said in an offhanded tone. He seems to want privacy, but as far as I know, he's still on good terms with everybody, including Marge. Freddie smiled again, unbuttoning his big polo coat. He's not going to stay on good terms with me if he stands me up a few more times. Are you sure he's on good terms with Marge? I got the idea from her that they'd had a quarrel. I thought maybe that's why they didn't go to Cortina. Freddie looked at him expectantly. Not that I know of. Tom went to the closet to get his jacket so that Freddie would know he wanted to leave, then realized just in time that the gray flannel jacket that matched his trousers might be recognizable as Dickie's. If Freddie knew Dickie's suit, Tom reached for a jacket of his own and for his own overcoat that were hanging at the extreme left of the closet. The shoulders of the overcoat looked as if the coat had been on a hanger for weeks, which it had. Tom turned around and saw Freddie staring at the silver identification bracelet on his left wrist. It was Dickie's bracelet, which Tom had never seen him wearing, but had found in Dickie's stud box. Freddie was looking at it as if he'd seen it before. Tom put it on an overcoat casually. Freddie was looking at him now with a different expression, with a little surprise. Tom knew what Freddie was thinking. He stiffened, sensing danger. You're not out of the woods yet, he told himself. You're not out of the house yet. Ready to go? Tom asked. You do live here, don't you? No, Tom protested, smiling. The ugly, freckled, blotched face stared at him from under the garnished thatch of red hair. If they could only get out without running into Signora Buffy downstairs, Tom thought. Let's go. Dickie loaded you up with all his jewelry, I see. Tom couldn't think of a single thing to say, a single joke to make. Oh, it's a loan, Tom said in his deep voice. Dickie gets tired of wearing it, so he told me to wear it for a while. He meant the identification bracelet, but there was also the silver clip on his tie, he realized, with the G on it. Tom had bought the tie clip himself. He could feel the belligerence growing in Freddy Miles as surely as if his huge body were generating a heat that he could feel across the room. Freddy was the kind of ox who might beat up someone he thought was a pansy, especially if the conditions were as propitious as this. Tom was afraid of his eyes. Yes, I'm ready to go, Freddy said grimly, getting up. He walked to the door and turned with a swing of his broad shoulders. That's the Otello, not far from the Inghilterra. Yes, Tom said. He's supposed to be there by 1 o'clock. Freddie nodded. Nice to see you again, he said unpleasantly, and closed the door. Tom whispered a curse. He opened the door slightly and listened to the quick tap, 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 tap of Freddie's shoes descending the stairs. He wanted to make sure Freddie got out without speaking to one of the Buffys again. Then he heard Freddie's Buongiorno, signora. Tom leaned over the stairwell. 3 stories down, he could see part of Freddie's coat sleeve. He was talking in Italian with Signora Buffy. The woman's voice came more clearly. Only Signor Greenleaf was saying. No, only one. Signor... Signor... I do not think he's gone out today at all, but I could be wrong, she laughed. Tom twisted the stairwell in his hands as if it were Freddie's neck. Then Tom heard Freddie's footsteps running up the stairs. Tom stepped back into the apartment and closed the door. He could go on insisting that he didn't live here, that Dickie was at Otello's, or that he didn't know where Dickie was, but Freddie would stop now until he found Dickie. Freddie would drag him downstairs and ask Signora Buffy who he was. Freddie knocked on the door. The knob turned. It was locked. Tom picked up a heavy glass ashtray. He couldn't get his hands around it, but he held to it at the edges. He tried to think just for a second what to do. Wasn't there another way out? What would he do with the body? He couldn't think. This was the only way out. He opened the door with the left hand. His right hand with the ashtray was drawn back and down. Freddy came in the room. Listen, would you mind telling? The curved edge of the ashtray hit the middle of his forehead. Freddy looked dazed. Then his knees bent and he went down like a bull hit between the eye with a hammer. Tom kicked the door shut. He slammed the edge of the ashtray into the back of Freddy's neck. He hit the neck again and again. Terrified that Freddy might be only pretending, that one of his huge arms might suddenly circle his leg and pull him down, Tom struck his head a glancing blow, and blood came. Tom cursed himself. He ran and got a towel from the bathroom and put it under Freddy's head. Then he felt Freddy's wrist for a pulse. There was one, faint, and it seemed to flutter away as he touched it, as if the pressure of his own fingers stilled it. In the next second it was gone. Tom listened for any sound behind the door. He imagined Senora Buffy standing behind the door with that hesitant smile she always had when she felt she was interrupting, but there wasn't any sound. There hadn't been any loud sound, he thought, either from the ashtray or from Freddy's fall. Tom looked down at Freddy's mountainous form on the floor, and he felt a sudden disgust and a sense of helplessness. It was only 24 hours until dark. He wondered if Freddy had been waiting for him anywhere, maybe in a car downstairs. He searched Freddy's pockets, a wallet, the American passport in the inside breast pocket of the overcoat, mixed Italian and some other kind of coins, a key case. There were 2 car keys on a ring that said Fiat. He searched for the wallet for a license. There it was, with all the particulars. Fiat 1400. Nero convertible, 19. He could find it. It was in the neighborhood. He searched every pocket and the pockets in the buff-colored vest for a garage ticket, but he found none. He went to the front window, then nearly smiled because it was so simple. There stood the black convertible across the street, almost directly in front of the house. He could not be sure, but he thought there was no one in it. He suddenly knew what he was going to do. He set about arranging the room, bringing out the gin and vermouth bottles from his liquor cabinet. On second thought, the Pernod, because it smelt so much stronger. He set the bottles on the long table and mixed a martini in a tall glass with a couple of ice cubes in it, drank a little of it so that the glass would be soiled, then poured some into another glass, took it over to Freddy and crushed his limp fingers around it and carried it back to the table. He looked at the wound and found that it had stopped bleeding, or was stopping, and had not run through the towel on the floor. He propped Freddy up again at the wall and poured some straight gin from the bottle down his throat. It didn't go down very well. Most of it went onto his shirt front, but Tom didn't think the Italian police would actually make a blood test to see how drunk Freddy had been. Tom let his eyes rest absently on Freddy's limp, messy face for a moment, and his stomach contracted sickly as he quickly looked away. He must do that again. His head had begun ringing as if he were going to faint. That'd be a fine thing, Tom thought as he wobbled across the room towards the windows. To faint now. He frowned at the black car down below and breathed the fresh air in deeply. He wasn't going to faint, he told himself. He knew exactly what he was going to do. At the last minute, the Pernod for both of them. 2 other glasses with their fingerprints and Pernod. And the ashtrays must be full. Freddy smoked Chesterfields. Then the Appian Way, one of those dark places behind the tomb. There were any street lights for long stretches on the Appian Way. Freddy's wallet would be missing. Objective: robbery. He had hours of time, but he didn't stop until the room was ready. The dozen lighted Chesterfields and the dozen of so lucky strikes burnt down and stabbed out in ashtrays, and a glass of Pernod broken and only half clean from the bathroom tiles. And the curious thing was that he set his scene so carefully, he pictured having hours more time to clean up. set between 9 this evening when the body might be found and midnight when the police just might decide he was worth questioning. Because somebody just might have known that Freddy Miles was going to call on Dickie Greenleaf today, and he knew that he would have it all cleared up by 8 o'clock, probably, because according to the story he was going to tell, Freddy would have left his house by 7, as indeed Freddy was going to leave his house by 7, and Dickie Greenleaf was a fairly tidy young man, even with a few drinks in him. But the point of the messy house was that the messiness substantiated merely for his own benefit the story that he was going to tell, and that therefore he had to believe himself. And he would still leave for Naples and Palma at 10:30 tomorrow morning, unless for some reason the police detained him, if he saw in the newspapers tomorrow morning that the body had been found, and the police did not try to contact him. It was only decent that he should volunteer to tell them that Freddy Miles had been at his house until late afternoon, Tom thought, but suddenly it occurred to him that a doctor might be able to tell that Freddy had been dead since noon, and he couldn't get Freddy out now, not in broad daylight. No, his own hope was that the body wouldn't be found for so many hours that the doctor couldn't tell exactly how long he had been dead, and he must try to get out of the house without anybody seeing him, whether he could carry Freddy down with a few amounts of ease, like a passed-out drunk, or not, so that if had to make any statement, he could say that Freddy left the house around 4 or 5 in the afternoon. He dreaded the 5 or 6 hour wait until nightfall so much that for a few moments he thought he couldn't wait. That mountain on the floor, and that hadn't wanted to kill him at all. It had been so unnecessary. Freddy and his stinking, filthy suspicions. Tom was trembling, sitting on the edge of a chair, cracking his knuckles. He wanted to go out and take a walk, but he was afraid to leave the body lying there. There had to be noise, of course, and Freddy were supposed to be talking and drinking all afternoon. Tom turned the radio on to a station that played dance music. He could have a drink at least. That was part of the act. He made another couple of martinis with ice with glass. He didn't even want it, but he drank it. The gin only intensified the same thoughts he had. He stood looking down at Freddy's long, heavy body in the polo coat that was crumpled under him, that he hadn't the energy or the heart to straighten out, though he annoyed him, and thinking how sad, stupid, clumsy, dangerous, and unnecessary his death had been, and how brutally unfair to Freddy. Of course, one could loathe Freddy, too, a selfish, stupid bastard who had sneered at one of his best friends, Dickie's. Certainly was one of his best friends, just because he suspected him of sexual deviation. Tom laughed at the phrase sexual deviation. Where was the sex? Where was the deviation? He looked at Freddy and said low and bitterly, Freddy Miles, you're a victim of your own dirty mind.